Hey guys, Trinity C here, coming at you with another video. So I was going through my computer and I actually found my old idea for X and Y sequels from around 2014. Now, I'm going to give you the overview of what the story would have been in my version of the sequels, and quick disclaimer before we start, there would have been two versions in my idea, so keep that in mind. Also, the player is a boy in this version of the story. The player wakes up in their bedroom and is informed by his mother that he only has a few minutes to get ready to meet his friends, Serena, Shauna, Trevor, and Tierno. Today is the day that they all get their first Pokemon. The player and his friends go to Aquacord Town where they meet Dexio and Cena, who are Professor Sycamore's assistants. Dexio and Cena give the player his starter Pokemon. Along with his starter Pokemon, the player receives a Pokedex and roller skates. The player then says goodbye to his mother and begins his journey. The player leaves Vanville Town and proceeds along routes 2 and 3. He then travels through the Santaloon Forest and arrives at Santaloon City. The player then beats Viola, the Santaloon City gym leader, and receives the Bug Badge. The player then proceeds to Route 4, later arriving at Lumio City, and is greeted by Cena and Dexio, who escort the player to Sycamore's lab. The player meets Professor Sycamore, who gives the player one of the Unova starters along with their Megastones. Professor Sycamore tells the player to meet him at Lysandre Labs. At Lysandre Labs, Sycamore introduces the player to his longtime friend Lysander. Sycamore informs the player that Lysander is researching how Mega Evolutions work. Lysander informs the player that he is hard at work trying to find the source of a Mega Evolution's power. Lysander wishes the player good luck and gives him a Mega Ring. Afterwards, the player continues his journey, proceeding through Route 5 and eventually arriving at Camphor Town. In Camphor Town, the player receives a mysterious message saying that Lysandre Labs is working on something huge. It's a secret project that will... The message gets cut off. After this, the player proceeds along Route 7 where a Munchlax is eating the berries along the route. A farmer informs the player that this Munchlax has been causing trouble for months. The player then lures the Munchlax with some Pokepups and captures the Munchlax. Afterwards, the player proceeds to the connecting caves and has to take an alternate route due to a boulder blocking his path. The player travels through Route 8 and arrives at Ambrit Town, where the player sees Serena, who suggests visiting Glittering Cave. At Glittering Cave, the player encounters Team Flare, who is mining for an unknown material. Team Flare is forcing the miners to do their dirty work by threatening to let their Houndoom attack them. The player sees this and attacks the Team Flare grunts. After defeating the grunts, the player sets the miners free, who informs the player that Team Flare is searching for a rare type of crystal. The player then arrives at Sillage City and defeats Grant, the Sillage City gym leader. Grant gives the player the Cliff Badge. The player then encounters more Team Flare grunts along Route 10. The player passes through Route 11 and Reflection Cave in order to arrive at Shalor City. In Shalor City, the player is greeted by Gherkin, the Mega Evolution expert. Gherkin educates the player on Mega Evolution and gives the player the Snorlaxite. Afterwards, the player defeats Karina, the Shalor City gym leader, earning the Rumble Badge. The player proceeds to Cormarine City by way of Route 12. There, the player challenges Ramos, the Cormarine City gym leader. After defeating Ramos, the player receives the Plant Badge. The player attempts to go to Lumio City, but learns that the power is out throughout the entire city. The player decides to visit Route 13 and its power plant. At the power plant, the player discovers that Team Flare is using the plant in order to power a machine. The player defeats Aliana, a scientist with Team Flare. Power is then restored to Lumio City, allowing the player to proceed. At Lumio City, the player defeats Clement, the Lumio City gym leader. This earns the player the Voltage Badge. The player then travels to Lavere City, where he defeats Valerie, the Lavere City gym leader. Valerie then gives the player the Fairy Badge. The player then decides to go to the Pokeball Factory, where he defeats Ciliosa and Brioni of Team Flare. Afterwards, the player arrives at Dendemil Town and is informed about Xerneas and Yveltal by Professor Sycamore. The player cannot proceed to Anasar City because the Mamoswine needed to navigate Route 17 is missing. So the player takes a detour at Frost Cavern where he must defeat Mabel of Team Flare. After defeating Mabel, the player can proceed to Anastar City where he earns the Psychic Badge from Olympia. The player receives a message saying that Xerneas and Yveltal have been captured by Team Flare. The player must head to Team Flare's HQ in Geosenge Town. There he discovers that Lysander is the leader of Team Flare and that he has created artificial megastones for Xerneas and Yveltal. Lysander mega evolves Xerneas and Yveltal, which causes them to go out of control, destroying Team Flare's HQ. Now that Mega Xerneas and Yveltal are on the loose, Zygarde awakens. Zygarde battles and defeats Mega Xerneas and Yveltal. Being severely injured, Xerneas and Yveltal are now able to be captured by the player. Depending on the version, when Xerneas or Yveltal is caught, the player also receives its Megastone. Zygarde separates from its 100% form and scatters throughout the whole Kalos region. The player then travels through Route 18, Kuroray Town, and Snowball City, where the player defeats gym leader Wulfric. Wulfric gives the player the Iceberg Badge, his 8th and final gym badge. The player proceeds through Route 21 and Victory Road to arrive at the Pokemon League. The player then defeats the Elite Four, which consists of Malva, Werkostrom, Drasna, and Cybold. Afterwards, the player defeats the champion Diantha. After entering the Hall of Fame, the player has an opportunity to explore the abandoned Lysander lab and capture Zygarde. In addition to this, the player can travel to new areas in Kalos where many new Megastones can be found. Anyways, that was my idea from 2014 on what Pokemon X and Y sequels could have been about story-wise. I personally really liked this idea, and I actually completely forgot I even came up with it until I just recently found it on my computer. I hope you guys like it and enjoyed it. Let me know in the comment section below if you did, or if you would have liked to see something different. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.